ISIS brides have returned to Australia after years in Syria, and 3 of the women are now facing some of the most serious charges you can be charged with in this country: terrorism offences and crime against humanity involving slavery. So today we're going to unpack what has actually happened, what the charges are, and what it means for Australians that are overseas in conflict zones, and whether Australia can deny citizens from returning back to their countries. Hi, I'm Hayder Shikara, a lawyer practicing in Australia. I lead a national team of over 40 lawyers across multiple practice areas, and I like to break down legal concepts for people to understand what is going on in this country. So the key development in this story is that on Thursday, 7th of May 2026, a group of Australian women and children returned to Australia after leaving the Al Roj camp in northeast Syria in late April. They came back on flights into Melbourne and into Sydney, and upon arrival, Australian authorities arrested 3 of the women, 2 in Melbourne and 1 in Sydney. In Sydney, a 32-year-old woman, Janai Safar, was arrested on arrival, charged with 2 offences: entering or remaining in a declared area and being a member of a terrorist organisation. And both of those offences carry a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment. And in Melbourne, a 53-year-old woman, Kausa Abbas, and a 31-year-old woman, Zainab Ahmed, were charged with offences that are frankly jaw-dropping and I've never seen in an Australian courtroom, and that is crimes against humanity, enslavement, plus slavery offences like possessing a slave, using a slave, and engaging in slave trading. Each of those slavery-related offences carry a maximum of 25 years. So those are on the absolute extreme in terms of allegations. So what are authorities alleging here? They're saying that for the Sydney matter, police allege that the woman travelled to Syria in 2015 to join her husband, who had previously left Australia and joined ISIS, and that she entered and remained in a declared conflict zone and joined ISIS. And in court, the prosecutor alleged that she traveled to Raqqa, and that was a place that's declared under Islamic State control, and she took steps to become a member of Islamic State. Now, for the Melbourne matters, the allegations are even more specific and frankly, absolutely shocking. Police are alleging that the 53-year-old traveled to Syria in 2014 with her husband and children and was complicit in the purchase of a slave for $10,000 US, keeping that woman in their home. They also allege that the 31-year-old also traveled to Syria in 2014 and knowingly kept a female slave in the home. So I know they've got this label of ISIS brides and everyone kind of imagines them to be associated with ISIS, but really a large part of the allegations here are to do with slavery. And of course, that involves a minority group that was targeted by ISIS back in the 2014 times around Syria and Iraq when ISIS was rampant. When ISIS was targeting this minority group called the Yazidis, they were targeted by mass killings, systematic enslavement, and mass rapings. Okay, this is a legal channel after all, so let's talk about the actual laws that are being used here and what has actually been breached. The first one is an interesting one, which is entering or remaining in a declared area. And Australia has a declared area regime under section 119.2 of the Criminal Code. But in plain terms, what that means is if the foreign minister declares a particular area in a foreign country because a listed terrorist organisation is engaged in hostile activity there, then Australians can commit an offence by intentionally entering or remaining in that area when they know that it's been declared. The maximum penalty for breaching this offence is 10 years. And you can see that this law was put in place by the government to stop Australians from going overseas to start training with terrorist groups, or to go overseas to fight for terrorist groups and coming home with all of these skills and the contacts that they don't want them to bring back here. The second offence, membership of a terrorist organization, and that one's pretty self-explanatory. If you are part of a terrorist organization, ISIS being one of the listed terrorist organizations, the prosecution has to prove that you are in fact a member of that terrorist organization, and just being a member in and of itself, being associated with it, communicating with people inside of it, that would be a breach of that law and you would be prosecuted under that. The third category, and this is a part that stands out, is slavery and crimes against humanity. And these offenses are in Division 270 and 271 of the Criminal Code. They cover slavery, servitude, and forced labor trafficking, and penalties can go up to 25 years here. Okay, so let's go into the practicalities of dealing with these offenses. I think the first question that you need to ask is, does Australia have jurisdiction to prosecute something that happened overseas in a different country? Well, normally no, they don't. But in these situations, Parliament has written laws that extends their geographical jurisdiction. And basically that means that these laws follow Australians overseas for certain conduct. And the AFP is explicitly alleging the conduct occurred in Syria and is charging under Commonwealth offences that can apply regardless of where they occurred. Of course, you're going to have the problem of dealing with these offences in an overseas jurisdiction, gathering evidence, getting witnesses, getting documents, getting forensics, all of that extremely difficult to kind of compile. We're talking about a war zone here in Iraq, in Syria, and as to whether or not the prosecution is going to be able to get this objective evidence, it's going to be difficult, of course, to run this case. Okay, the next major question that people will be asking is, how did they get back here if the government didn't want them back, if no one really wants them back? Why would any Australian consider having a terrorist or somebody that was associated with a terrorist organization living next door to them? It would make no sense at all. And if you had the opportunity to prevent them from coming, why was the government involved in actually getting them to return back to the country? Because it did require a level of government coordination. And of course, this is where the huge debate lies, and that's whether or not citizens have the right to return to their own countries. So in reality, stopping an Australian citizen from ever returning back into the country is, of course, legally complex, and it's going to be a real practical problem, because when you have your citizenship to Australia, you have, by virtue of that citizenship, a right to re-enter the country. And I know everybody's saying, yes, but you threw away those rights when you decided to betray your country and to go overseas and to fight for a terrorist organization. I understand all of that. But the problem that Australian government has is that in order to establish all of that, they need to return so that they can be trialed in court. And all of that can be then found in a court of law here. Because we do have a rule of law in this country, and it's not selective, it applies to everyone across the field. So you're not able to just suddenly restrict somebody without them going through the legal process. In order for them to be arrested and prosecuted, they need to be here in the country. Okay, and so that leads to the next question that people are asking: what about the children of the women that went overseas? Children who didn't have any say in these decisions, that are Australian citizens as well, and they went overseas, and many of them have now lived their lives in refugee zones, in camps, in war zones, and they're going to have a completely disillusioned version of reality, not to mention PTSD, living in these horrific conditions. So what do you do with these children? Do you say, let's leave them in these overseas camps, it's not our problem anymore, you made this decision? These children, they have Australian citizenships, they were born in this country. It's a huge moral conundrum that I think people struggle with. And I think that's where Australia has to do two things at once that seem to be at conflict with one another, and that is to protect their community and to protect the individual rights of citizens, being, you know, these children here. All right, so over to you. What do you think Australia's priority should be in cases like this? Should they be focusing on prevention, on reintegration, on stopping these people from coming overseas? Please drop it in the comments. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot, and it helps get this message out to the broader public. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.